We are stepping back into history today, exploring how preserving and restoring the past can inspire the way we live, design, and connect with our own heritage. Joining me is Jennifer Carlquist, Executive Director of Boscobel House and Gardens, a historic estate in the Hudson Valley that has long been a hub for design, history, and preservation. More than a beautiful place to visit, Boscobel is a landmark of craftsmanship showcasing an extraordinary collection of furniture and decorative arts. Right now, they're undergoing their first major restoration in 50 years, a project you'll hear about that is both a challenge and an incredible opportunity to reimagine how historic spaces can engage with modern audiences. We talk about the fascinating story of Boscobel, the importance of historic preservation, and how the estate has influenced design at large and vice versa. So settle in and let's take another trip through history with Boscobel. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host of the Grandma Silver podcast and founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma Silver. Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I'm really excited because I think this conversation hits on a lot of different talking points. I think it's really exciting to have an opportunity to talk with someone who's working in a space that is really addressing past, present, future all at one time. And you're in a unique position that you're able to do that right now. So welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much, Allie. You're right. An exciting time at Boscobel and really in the field as a whole. So it's great to be able to speak with you, and you're clearly a very savvy audience.
Could you give us a little background on yourself and how you got involved at Boscobel?
I am a 30-year museum professional, and I've always loved and studied and interpreted decorative arts. And those are decorative arts made, used, or retailed in America, really from the earliest days into the present. The beginning of my career was in my home state of Minnesota. I worked at an historic house museum called Glensheen in Duluth, Minnesota, on the shores of Lake Superior. It had an incredible collection that was multi-layered and really intact since the original inhabitants had lived in the house. I moved on to the Weissman Art Museum in Minneapolis, a fabulous Frank Gehry building, his first museum, and got a much broader sense of contemporary art and spent a very happy 8 years at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, everything from a fabulous collection of prairie school design to early American objects to contemporary craft. And about 15 years ago, I moved to New York. I studied at the Cooper Hewitt. In the process of that, got excited about New York neoclassical furniture. And the absolute home for that is Boscobel. So I started 10 years ago as a part-time curator, really focusing on the incredible furniture collection here. And about 7 years ago, stepped into this role as executive director. So I came for the furniture, but I stayed for the chance to bring the rest of the site and the programming up to that incomparable level of quality. So the very best collection of Duncan Phyfe and his contemporaries, the best craftsmanship in New York made between 1800 and 1820. And since then, we've brought in a lot of contemporary artists and designers to comment on the collection, to respond to that collection, finding connections between then and now. And that really is, I think, forging our path to the future.
Now, we'll talk about the decorative arts a bit more because I know that's a big part of what the museum houses. But could we also get a little background just for those who are unfamiliar with what Boscobel, because when I was researching, this history is really kind of fascinating. It is a historic house museum, if I'm not mistaken.
It is. I would say it's really the premier historic house museum of its type in the Hudson River Valley. We are a strange preservation story. Really, it's unique. Boscobel was originally built between 1804 and 1808 as the dream home of a Loyalist family, Elizabeth and States Dykeman. It was built in Montrose, New York, and it fell out of family hands in the 1880s. After that point, it passed through a number of hands, and by 1955, the house was actually sold to a wrecker for $35 and demolished. Preservationists just couldn't let it go, though. They saved as many bits and pieces as they could, and they resurrected it 12 miles south and opened it as a museum of early New York design in 1961. We were very much the lucky beneficiaries of funds from Lila Wallace. She was our founding patron. She loved all things beautiful, all things historic, and Boscobel was her pet project. She had been to Colonial Williamsburg 52 times by the time that she
Wow.
signed on to this project. And that idea of resurrecting something that was lost was very appealing to her. They found just a glorious site on the Hudson River. We have 112 acres that include a heritage apple orchard, an organic farm that grows produce for local food pantries, a 22-acre woodland trail, and the most beautiful views in America. We're so proud of that, and that glorious landscape really is a strong potential that we've been focusing on for the last 5 years until last April when gravity changed our focus because Boscobel's beautiful library ceiling in April of 2024 collapsed and it caused profound damage to the room, to adjacent rooms, and really the building as a whole. And we have been, for the past year, kind of digging out of that debris. And now we're starting to get very excited about what space that has made for us to really rethink Boscobel going forward. So I'll say that we were known since the 1970s as one of the most beautiful house museums in America, always for the exterior architecture. Boscobel was really saved because it was a beautiful work of art, not because the original Dykeman family were particularly important or influential. And that's rare in preservation stories. Today, we lean into that beauty in everything that we do.
You brought something up which was interesting because as someone who studied historical archaeology, I've loved material culture, decorative arts, and historic house museums are a really big part of that world. What I find so interesting is that oftentimes the property, the historic house, holds a lot of its own history and the interiors help to tell its story. How does this differ just because it was essentially resurrected to be a museum versus it being someone's home that we preserved? Like how does your storytelling change or how does the interpretation and engagement change with that?
I love that question, Allie. It's so smart. And really, it's why I want to be a Boscobel versus just about any other historic house, in that it's really a tremendous opportunity. When I used to tour people through Boscobel, and I spend a lot of time mainly with subject specialists or higher level, donors. I don't get to do a lot of general audience tours because we have an amazing guide team for that. But for the tours that I give, I highlight those behind the scenes decisions. And I always described Boscobel as the great curatorial conundrum of the 20th century. How do you furnish a house that isn't where it was, that
Hmm.
never housed the people we talk about, that doesn't necessarily have the objects that were inside of it? How do you furnish a Boscobel? And that really is what sets Boscobel apart. 99% of historic house museums, of course, are where they were. They have what they had. Or they have something close to it. They really serve to be a time capsule for people dead and gone. We don't have that level of authenticity. We have a different kind of authenticity. And what I'll say is Boscobel's biggest job is not really to be a shrine to an earlier era. It's to be beautiful and engaging and highlight the best of multiple eras because we're really serving present day audiences. So that's one of the thrilling things about being at Boscobel. We are surrounded by wonderful historic house museums in the Hudson Valley. There's Olana, which is Frederick Church's house, Thomas Cole's site, which of course is Thomas Cole's house. And those houses should be, right, what they were. You should know more about what Thomas Cole lived with when you visit that. Olana needs to recreate what Frederick Church's vision was. Boscobel really gets to be everyone's house on the Hudson. And so we have this incredible core collection from, again, 1800 to 1820, but we have a lot of play. We can look before to Native American material culture, we can look after to contemporary craft. And that really is why it's so exciting to be here. So that curatorial conundrum is really front and center right now when we talk about how to put this place back together and get back to an experience that speaks more to visitors today than the last time Boscobel was furnished, which was 50 years ago. They brought in the top experts, the top stars, the best designers and curators involved in our specialty. And now we get to do it over again, whether we like it or not. We're facing new choices. We really get to be transparent that it is about choices. And so many house museums you visit, you think, well, of course it was always like this. And there is a almost a hiding of that curatorial hand at Boscobel. This is a totally curated environment because the house isn't where it was, because the landscape is what we design it to be. And there's an exciting aspect to that and a creative aspect to that that I think gets people's juices flowing. And it has the freedom to engage visitors in different ways.
I love that. I'm kind of going off of this a little bit because this is partially my own curiosity. I'm sure some of our listeners as well. How do you determine what you're collecting based on that information?
What a good question, because I really think that having parameters helps you be more creative. So while our core collection is narrowly defined now to that period, the best of what was made and used in New York between 1800 and 1820, our robust exhibition program gets to play off of that. So we use that as the central spine of the quality level of the aesthetics that we're playing with. But again, we get to have artists and objects that react to that, that juxtapose to that. And that's really exciting. If you don't have that framework, then there's less focus. And it's very easy, I would say, to get sloppy, disorganized, to not know what you're coming for. So we have to be committed to that core experience. And there is so much vibrancy there. That's one of the great things about classicism is, we're never done with it, is for thousands of years, right? We keep returning to these themes, these precepts of symmetry, of harmony, and a particular kind of grandeur that, the world is not yet done with, and I don't think ever will be. But that doesn't mean they can't also have something. For instance, one year we filled the house with 300 objects that were broken and repaired by the 19th century with curious repairs. It was fabulous to see those objects that were far more rustic and curious and gnarled and in the context of these pristine rooms.
Yeah.
So really playing against that is exciting, but it starts by being committed to that core.
I find this so interesting, and I apologize if I wind up kind of bouncing around because as you speak, I'm picking up on different things that I'd love to hear more about. One of them is that you are touching a bit on, some design terms, right? Harmony, balance. There is a tie-in of sorts to design. You had a 1970s redesign by a Met Museum curator.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking, Allie. And I have to say, it was so fun listening to your previous podcast because so many of the characters are involved in Boscobel's story too. Boscobel really is a showcase of this one narrow focus, New York neoclassicism. And so many of the experts involved in that are connected to the Metropolitan, to Winterthur, to the White House, and all topics that you've addressed in the past. In the 1970s, a group of papers came to light that were inventories related to the Dyckman family original possessions. And around the same time, there was a hotshot curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the American Wing named Barry Tracy. Barry Tracy was making a name for himself as highlighting the work of Duncan Phyfe and his contemporaries, these great New York cabinet makers that were really experimenting with shape and line and reintroducing these classical forms from ancient Greece and ancient Rome and even ancient Egypt. It was Barry Tracy's specialty, and he got into the ear of Lila Wallace, our founding patron, and said, the Boscobel you opened in 1961 is lovely, but It could also be grand and important and scholarly if you leaned into my specialty, Duncan Fife and his contemporaries. The world doesn't necessarily need a shrine to the Dykeman family, but New York needs a showplace of the best craftsmanship it ever produced. And I think that should be Boscobel. He was just convincing enough, and I'm so grateful for that. So Lila Wallace agreed really to almost empty the house and start over and give Barry Tracy the license and the checkbook to buy the best of so many examples that were just coming on the market in that 1970s period. So he refurnished Boscobel, not just by himself, but he brought in Edward Vason Jones, a dandy architect from Georgia, and the two of them also partnered together at the White House, the State Department rooms, Blair House, several other restorations. They worked with the best craft houses, so they brought in Scalamandre and Brunswick and Fee. They had upholstery and carpets and window treatments woven custom for Boscobel based on scholarly research. And what they created were not only appropriately scholarly rooms, but they became the most beautiful rooms in America, cited over and over again as that elite class of beautiful rooms. So even if you weren't necessarily a decorative arts scholar, you could come and have this magical experience walking through these spaces, seeing the fall of light on the polished brass or the polished mahogany. And for 50 years, their design really held. So that combination of, we have to be dazzling and we have to be historically, accurate, but secondarily to that beauty. That really was a Boscobel ethos. And I'll say that it was at the tail end of other organizations shifting away from that. So at about the same time, Colonial Williamsburg was, I would say, turning the page to a more archaeological approach, where they no longer thought that their priority was to be beautiful. And so, the decorators were out the door and the archaeologists came in. That's not a bad thing. And that happened again and again at the Metropolitan as well. So that idea of the white lab coat approach that you're weeding out taste and you're really embracing only evidence, that's not necessarily what Boscobel has done. We really strive to be the most beautiful rooms, the most beautiful examples of what we're showing as we can be. Not that we eschew authenticity or scholarship, but the primary purpose, it has to be beautiful first, or no one will come. So
Yeah.
no one will enjoy themselves. And again, 99% of historic house museums, they should be what they were and have what they had. But we get to be more than that. So that's again, it's a unique, really legacy. And Barry Tracy's rooms, I absolutely adored them. Now we're going through the process where it's a room by room reassessment. Or what of Barry Tracy's stays? What needs to be revised or reproduced? And what do we think we want to do with that next? So it's an exciting time. I'll say too that one of the approaches for Barry Tracy was these beautiful jewel box rooms were really like shadow boxes that you looked into. And going forward, I don't think audiences are satisfied with that. We want to make sure that these are rooms that people can actually enter. So how to do that in a way that's safe for the objects, safe for the people, and really truly engaging, more of a 360 experience. That's an exciting puzzle that we're working out right now.
We'll talk a little bit more about what some of these next steps look like in a minute. I do want to stick with the 70s redesign for just 1 second. You brought up Winterthur. Much like a Winterthur, the collection is one draw and is obviously part of the storytelling, but you also brought up the general aesthetic that lures people out. I'm curious because, of course, in doing so and having these collections and then tying it into design, there's an impact, right? There's this residual impact. Do you know of kind of the impact that Boscobel had on the design world, especially because you had so many big names attached to the project?
What I'll say is in part because of the engine of Lila Wallace because we were connected to Reader's Digest, which was her magazine, one of the most widely published magazines of the 20th century. Because our head for the first 30 years was the former head of marketing for Reader's Digest, our director, Fred Stanier. And because we're only an hour north of New York City, where there are so many designers and publications, shelter magazines, Boscobel has a favored reputation in the design world. I think well deserved. Again, it's because it's a combination of aesthetics and scholarship that is pretty rare. Winterthur has it. We're so lucky. Obviously, that was incredibly influential to everyone involved. And that yes, you have real objects, but in an environment that's totally curated and made up. That I think was profoundly influential. But H.F. DuPont for his first 10 years was very private about the house. Didn't agree to a lot of publicity. That only really came later. With Boscobel, promoting the house was always front and center. And I'll say that there was a lot of attention in, the New York Times in its early days. Boscobel was the site of a show called the Sound and Light Show. And this was an elaborate $500,000 laser light show that Mrs. Wallace funded for 10 years. You could see it at the Louvre, at the pyramids, at the Grand Canyon, at the Liberty Bell, and at Boscobel. So we didn't do anything by half in those days, especially with Lila Wallace funds at the ready. But what I'll say is the rooms themselves were so beautifully composed. And one of the magic tricks of Boscobel is that the play of light on the surface. And that's any surface. In our period, that 1800 to 1820 period, light was the most important design element. So how light fell on the grain of mahogany or the polished brass, how light was transmitted through newly invented light sources, how it bounced against mirrors and cut glass, all of that was so engaging and powerful in the period. And it still very much is now, especially when you're outside of an encyclopedic art museum where the galleries are all lit the same. When you're in a space like Boscobel that changes every time of day, every day of the year, it feels alive and it responds to your movements in the room the way you really just don't get in a sterile gallery environment. So there is such a compelling nature to the rooms that they organized. Up until, April, a lot of my calls were, what color is the dining room? Or how did someone upholster the back of that chair? Or could you please measure the cornice for me? So there are a lot of aspirational, designers and homeowners out there finding inspiration here. That is exactly why places like Boscobel exist. So, and I'll say that most museums, many museums in America were created specifically to help elevate the taste of American homeowners, manufacturers, and designers.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's absolutely front and center in our mission.
On kind of that note-ish, you even mentioned the White House. Of course, the Met has come up. So, are there influences based on some of these other, I guess we would call them historic institutions, that are reflected in either the collections or design of Boscobel now?
How do these institutions sort of play off each other? Is that a fair
That's a better
question?
way of wording it, yes.
Well, I'll say there is a lot of interplay with decorative arts and design focused collections. And of course, as I mentioned, Colonial Williamsburg, the Metropolitan, and Winterthur, I would say are our sort of closest relatives in that if you look, the same circle of donors and collectors, the same circle of dealers and designers and curators who all knew each other. Again, that's really from the 1920s all the way into the 1970s. In the 1970s, when Barry Tracy was developing the Boscobel that we all know and love, the other organizations I mentioned, Winterthur to some extent, Colonial Williamsburg, the Metropolitan, they were revising that idea of a museum as a tastemaker. They wanted more of a museum to be a reference, an encyclopedia, more scholarly, more archaeological. Boscobel really still embraces that idea that it needs to be beautiful. It needs to be beautiful to draw people here. It needs to be beautiful to inspire people. The interiors have more examples of a particular kind of, we have more sofas than anyone would have had in 1804. We have more desks and bookcases than anyone would have had in 1804. All of the rooms are, beautifully appointed with gorgeous textiles. And that isn't necessarily historically accurate, but it is appropriate to what the Dykmans dreamed of doing, and it absolutely helps Boscobel be a dream house for today.
Much of the role of a museum of any kind is the storytelling and interpretation. If you're looking at a space like Boscobel, those collections, it's really, and this is again what I find so interesting with it also being technically a historic house museum, is that the story is very much about the collections. And so it's really, like you said, kind of that living gallery. So of course there will be more, there will be excess because it's a display of the collection, not necessarily an accurate representation of how one might have lived room to room during that time.
I think you've just written our next brochure, Allie. That was great.
It is so rare to see a historic house museum with that approach.
Well, it is. And I have to say, I have the pleasure of going to a lot of places like this. Of course, I lead study tours and encourage other emerging scholars and also experienced scholars to draw inspiration from other sites and really try to spread best practices. And what I'll say is what's appropriate here at Boscobel is not necessarily right, for every organization. Absolutely. As I think I've said, 99%, right, of places like ours should be what they were and have what they had and focus on that. It connects back to my personal background and passions. And also, I think what Boscobel does best is the decorative arts and the material culture, as you said, and those everyday objects, elevated or not. What I love about that is it's the one art form that everyone makes choices about all day long, no matter your background, no matter your economic level. Everyone made a decision today about which fork or spoon to use, which mug to drink out of, which chair to sit in or not, and how. And that to me is something that is so compelling about our field. Not everyone, right? Very few of us get to make great decisions about oil paintings, squares on the wall, but all of us get to handle and know and love and use these objects. And we all have attachment to our favorite things, no matter what those favorite things are. And so that to me is a resonance that just is thrilling. It's a common language. I think that's what's so exciting. And we get to make the point that that connects you to all periods, to all cultures, is every culture has their thing, right? Almost every culture has ceramics of some kind. And so the universality of that, the fact that humans make beautiful and useful things and always have, that to me is just what's so thrilling about this field. And I think that it's that combination, as you said, that it's archaeology, it's design, it's aesthetics. It's never boring. There's always more. And again, everyone gets to make choices about that. So to acknowledge that this period, 1800 to 1820, was an explosion of talent in New York, and yes, also a great swell of wealth in New York, an opportunity for those designers and craftspeople, as well as patrons. But we're also in a similar moment where there's so many fabulous craftspeople and designers working in the Hudson Valley in New York City, digging into natural materials. Maybe they're reusing fallen trees or reclaimed timber of some kind. Maybe they're exploring carving in a way that people did in Duncan Fife's era. Maybe they're deciding, no, they don't like doing, traditional methods and they want to use entirely new methods and materials. That's exciting. It's this continuum. It's a conversation that is never finished and keeps going. And it connects all of the dots. It's nature, it's design, it's history, and they're all in conversation here. So that's what I love about this place.
We touched on the restoration, and I think it's an exciting opportunity to make, more to love, right? So, could you walk us through? Because I know that in some brief conversation before this, there are some phases and there's a timeline, and there are some ideas swirling around of what this process looks like. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Phase one is really addressing the emergency of the collapse and the related damage. So, putting the building back together so that it's safe and it's safe for both people and objects. It means replacing all the ceilings as well as the period details, those historic moldings that make Boscobel so distinctive. Those will be back, we hope, and in place by July 1. But when the house reopens, we will still have damaged carpets, damaged wallpapers, missing window treatments, objects that are removed because they're either being conserved or simply were beyond saving. So Boscobel will be in an interim era for a little while. And as we reopen, we are going to be doing a room by room assessment of which objects do we think need to be replaced or reproduced or entirely revised for a new purpose. So a couple of the period rooms we're planning on converting into gallery space, which is, quite common with historic house museums. And then several other of our period rooms, we're going to try to make them more flexible going forward. So objects can change and still retain that period beauty that everybody associates with Boscobel. But it's going to take a few years for Boscobel really to return to the period perfect, beautiful Boscobel that we're so known for. And I'll say too, it's also going to take a lot of money because, reweaving 19th century style carpets and, having reprinted hand blocked wallpaper, all of those things require funding. So we are in the process of doing that, and it will be a multi-year campaign. I will say that programming at Boscobel continues, and we've tried as much as we can to keep from disturbing our program. So our fall fabulous Chamber Music Festival continues undisrupted. This fall, we're also in September opening a wonderful new exhibition called Scenic Vistas, highlighting those connections between our glorious landscape and decorative arts collection. That's with funding from the Terra Foundation and from the National Endowment for the Arts. But it's going to be several years of digging in, research, reassessment, bringing in exciting colleagues and scholars to really think about what should Boscobel look like going forward. So it's an exciting process. Again, that great curatorial conundrum. I'm so thrilled that we're in this place right now, that we're being focused on our community and our visitors and what they need. And how can this place still support them feeling at home here?
Do you find that because you've touched on visitor engagement and accessibility through this restoration a couple of times with people having the opportunity to interact with contemporary pieces as well, to engage with a space, not just look at a space. You've thrown some things out. Does that also change the way you're approaching potential? Like, does that open new doors for you with programming and events as well?
It does. And I'll say that we were very lucky. I know the Institute of Museum and Library Services is under threat right now, or at the very least reorganization. Just a few years ago, we received an IMLS grant to develop a new interpretive plan. And through that plan, we explored ways to essentially have discrete interventions in the house. And we talked about how can we have, temporary installations or insertions that activate the space, but still keep that Barry Tracy, frozen space frozen. Now we really get to think about, but what if we were starting from scratch? Because essentially we are. The disaster really did open up the house in ways that I don't think we could have imagined before. Not that you would ever wish this on anyone. And we're so lucky that, no one was injured and that the objects that were damaged are objects. But we get to welcome visitors in ways that we just couldn't before. We get to consider them first and not just how can we work around these objects, but what is it that a guest actually needs, a modern day guest needs. So even introducing an ADA lift to the first floor, that was a project long in coming. When Boscobel reopens, that will be a reality. And that's something that's so exciting. Having, again, options for a guest to be able to sit. We specialize in serving multi-generational audiences, and many people need a place to sit down.
Yeah.
I'll say too that there really isn't a public restroom currently in the mansion, and so finding space for that very fundamental human need is something that we are actively raising funds for. So how can we really think visitors first and make sure that the Boscobel they experience is one they want to experience, that no matter what they see there, they know that they're welcome, that they're respected, that they're cared for, that their basic human needs are met. And then I think everyone has a better chance of going away more inspired, better educated, and really empowered.
Now, I know you already had a lot of creative liberty as far as curation and the collections go, but does this change anything for you, or are you looking at anything differently from a curatorial perspective? Are you looking to add to the collection, replace anything that was lost?
Well, you've talked to enough curators now, Allie, that you know we're never done,
That's
right?
very true.
There's always more than we need. So no curator, I'm sure, will ever say, nope, the collection's all finished. We have everything we could ever want. There are definitely objects right now. And what I'll encourage your audience to consider is it is time to collect. So
Yeah.
if anyone who has any house at all to furnish, especially I'll say this early 19th century period, oh my goodness, what you could buy today. I mean, you could absolutely fill a household for what it would cost to have furnished a room, 50 years ago. It really is an astonishing time to buy. The quality is there, the durability is there, the comfort is there. And so, it might just take some investment in upholstery or maybe, gluing back a veneer piece or two, but it is absolutely time to collect. So I'll say too, there's a shift right now generationally that so many of those collectors inspired by Boscobel and its contemporary museums of, that again, 20s through the 70s golden era, those folks are passing on what they own. So everyone should be watching those sale houses. And that's, yes, Sotheby's, Christie's, Brunk, Skinner, Jeffrey Evans, like you name it. And it's time to buy. So I'll say
Okay.
that. But in terms of our collection, I will say that it is really important to me that we double down on what Boscobel does well, in that this golden age of New York furniture and decorative arts, it was absolutely an apex of talent, of creativity, and it is endlessly fascinating. And it's finding new audiences today. So those Brooklyn flea shoppers, those are Duncan Fife connoisseurs too. They just don't know it yet. And so being able to play around our specialty in the temporary exhibition space
Mhm.
really again helps highlight the relevance today of this material. And again, classicism never goes out of style. There are just, market fluctuations, but classicism is eternally relevant. And so I'm very happy that that's where we are. There is always something to learn from this material. It's so many exciting things happening in the field right now where we're learning makers we never knew about. We're learning about African American contributions to decorative arts that really were, somehow left out of I won't say somehow, we know how. They were left out of the canon before.
Yeah.
It's exciting. Boscobel was thrilled to lend a pot by Thomas Kamara to a fabulous show at the New York Historical Society a couple of Januaries ago. That was a blockbuster show about early 19th century stoneware. So, but this amazing show about an incredible artist who was a free African American man and advocate and entrepreneur. And so finding those nuggets of history is so thrilling. And being able to connect these stories with everyone's story, that is such an exciting time to be at museums.
Yeah.
For the Hudson Valley and really for, all historic sites of our, vintage, we're all getting ready for the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution.
Hmm.
And that is an exciting thing too to wrap your head around is how does the design world embrace that? How does the design world highlight that? And really, I think we're so well poised is what did Americans want to see themselves as free, as independent people, so many of them, and the furniture made in those early decades after the Revolutionary War, those are aspirational. That's telling you, what do we want our nation to look like? We wanted it to look like Boscobel. So it really is interesting that they're drawing inspiration from these, early democracies and republics, and you see it writ large at a place like this. There's always another side to the prism of what we do.
I've touched on this very briefly in prior conversations, but especially as we inch closer and closer to this 250th community. I mean, that's really about a celebration of the nation. It just kind of triggered this concept of, you mentioned fundraising kind of briefly. What role does community support play in the restoration project right now?
Ali, I'll say that when rethinking Boscobel, we really are thinking community first, as I mentioned, from an installation standpoint and an education standpoint. And what I can also say is that the disaster we're facing now demonstrates again, we've heard it over and over again, places like Boscobel, their survival is not inevitable. So there aren't enough Lila Wallaces today saving a place, turning it over for the community, endowing it so that it can survive and thrive, and no one needs support it. We need living community members, living concerned citizens to say, I love this place. I want to share it with other people. I want to make sure that it thrives and that it contributes to the community in all the ways that it can. We depend on that. The largesse of Lila Wallace really doesn't remotely cover what's necessary to open Boscobel's doors to everyone. And that's our goal these days. We probably offer a lot of programming that Lila Wallace and her generation might not have envisioned. One of our most popular programs is the farmers market, a weekly farmers market that we host year round on our grounds. It is a family ritual. It is a lifeline to local farmers who wouldn't have otherwise a marketplace to offer their produce. And we're also in a bit of a food desert in our tiny pocket, our tiny town. There's just one grocery store for 10,000 residents.
Wow.
And we're bordered by river and mountains and tunnels and bridges. So it really is an important contribution to the community. That is part of Boscobel's mission too. So it's not just about design, it's also about remembering that community vibrancy depends upon, yes, Boscobel as a museum, but also Boscobel remembering it's a failed farmhouse too, and we want other farmers to thrive. So no family lives here now, but we absolutely want to support and honor the families that do live in our community, and we need them to support us in turn. We're knocking on doors of, yes, the decorative arts connoisseurs, architecture enthusiasts, preservationists, but we're also making sure that what happens at Boscobel is open to the community, it's informed by the community, and that this is a process, an educational process, just like all of the other programs that we do. So, for instance, a lot of the conservators that we're bringing in, there's a public component to every project. If you're working on some of our prints, I want you to do a demonstration in the visitor center. If you're repairing furniture, I want you to make a replica of something so that guests could actually sit in it someday. Those are the kinds of projects that we're trying to make sure that we're transparent about the choices that we're making and that we're always thinking that there's community input in those choices.
And are you fundraising or is it a campaign?
We are. So, yes, our emergency restoration really does depend on generosity. No small nonprofit. We really are an independent nonprofit. No one's budget could sustain the incredible costs that are coming along with this project. And I'll say again, not our Lila Wallace endowment and not insurance proceeds. Anyone who's ever had an insurance claim can attest that it just doesn't cover everything that's involved. Currently, the expenses just to get the building back to safe, it's $1.2 million above the insurance proceeds that we've received so far. Even the scaffolding, even the
Wow.
scaffolding exceeds what we normally spend on the whole property in a year.
Mm.
So it really is a major event. And we've had wonderful, supportive conversations with funders. But so far, we don't have a lead donor raising their hand to say, I'll start. And, other donors can match and get behind me.
Well, I will preface this by saying we'll put links for folks to find more information about how to find you in general, social media, website, all those things. But we can also include more information on how they could get in touch to discuss some of that with you as well, because of course we're all about preservation here.
Oh,
And
thank
a
you.
big part of preservation is money, and people don't like to talk about that all the time, but it's just the reality. So we can ensure, that we'll stick information in our show notes about that as
I so appreciate that, Allie. Yes, you do not have to be a Lila Wallace today to make a huge impact here. It makes such a difference when living people raise their hand and say, "Yes, I love that place too. Yes, I want to make sure that that gets passed on to the next generation." Because preservation isn't really about the past, at least not at Boscobel. It's about what do we want to extend into the future? What are the ideas, the objects, the stories we want to, give to the next generation? That's our job. It's not about embalming, the past stories that someone else used to care about. It's really about us committing to what do we care about now that we want to send into the future.
I love that. Going to ask you what it is that you hope that visitors today are taking away from Boscobel. I mean, they're interacting with history in really unique ways when they visit. So, do you have any takeaways that you just hope land with folks when they are visiting?
The biggest thing that we really work hard is we want people to feel at home here. We want all people to feel at home here. We want all people to find a home here. And just like your own home, right? It's restful, it's inspiring, it's where you connect with the people you love, it's where you learn, it's where you find respite. All of those things we hope that people find here, and we get to do that in, these really exciting ways. Beautiful places, beautiful gardens, beautiful objects, this incredible view, active play, walking through the woodland trail or making a wreath, at the holiday times. All of these things are so many of the programs, learning from a designer, having, a Thomas Jane lecture. But really what we want people to find here is that they feel at home, and everything else, connection, education, inspiration, empowerment, all of it comes after that.
Perfect.
I'm so glad to have you as a cheerleader, and thank you so much. We can't wait to welcome you to this place if you've ever,
I would
if
love,
you're ever
yes.
in our neck of the woods.